One of the biggest news events in Winnipeg of the past year was the reopening of Portage and Main to pedestrian traffic for the first time since 1979. Even after this monumental shift in the downtown landscape, questions remain about how that reopening will shape the downtown core and the investments being made in different parts of the city, not just in the downtown part of Winnipeg. Now, a new book examines the historic intersection and its role in Winnipeg's history and culture, past and present. It's called Portage and Main: How an Iconic Intersection Shaped Winnipeg's History, Politics, and Urban Life. We're joined now by the authors of the book and the hosts of the One Great History podcast, Sabrina, Janke, and Alex Judge. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to start with you here, Sabrina. You grew up outside of the city, and I've seen references that you've made to still thinking about Winnipeg as, quote, the big city, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
How have you interacted with the intersection in your life?
My first experience at Portage and Main would have been when I was a teenager. I was doing this program at MTC, and it was like a backstage pass thing for high school students. You'd go in once a month, and I was carpooling in with my dad and one of his friends who worked on Portage. And I believe at like 7:30ish in the morning, they just kind of plunked me down at Portage and Main and were like, goodbye, we have to go to the office. And then I had to try and navigate from Portage and Main to get to the Manitoba Theatre Center. I did not have a phone with a map on it. I had this dinky little BlackBerry. And I remember getting lost and then winding up, I think, on Alexander, looking at the river and being like, whoa. No. I found my way there. It was fine. I don't remember my mom being thrilled about it when I told her later, and then I worked downtown throughout university, and mostly I wanted to walk across it all the time because I would try and like run errands, and it just became such a hassle to navigate that space as an employee.
Right. I would imagine that has somewhat shaped your perception of the intersection, given the amount of troubles that it has given you over the years. Alex, how about for you? How has Portage and Main played a part in your Winnipeg experience?
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of a similar story. One of my first jobs, I was like an FSWEP student working in downtown, and I arrived for my first day at work and had to get off the bus coming from North Kildonan and go through the underground to get to the office building. And I just remember getting down there and it being like so like labyrinthian, and sort of going around being like, I don't know what any of these signs mean. Eventually coming up, eventually in the right place, and just being like so sweaty by the time I got to work.
This is, I think, the experience of thousands of Winnipeggers over the years, until, of course, this year when all of that infrastructure was removed and people could walk on the surface level of Portage and Main. What has your experience been, Alex, since that reopening has taken place?
It just seems normal, doesn't it? Sorry.
It does. It totally seems normal.
It does. I went and we walked across it on the first day. We actually jaywalked because it turned out it wasn't open till like 11 a.m. or so. And so we were like, well, here we go, in front of the mayor also. But no, and I've been back a couple times, walked across, and I'm like, I don't know, man. It just seems like a regular old street crossing.
Amazing how your first experience with that overland crossing was maybe one of the last times you could technically jaywalk across that intersection.
Yeah, true.
How about for you, Sabrina? What was your experience like once the intersection reopened? What were your impressions, and were you thinking about that poor kid trying to get to the RMTC from the corner?
I was, and I mean, I love stories that go slightly wrong, so I think part of me misses the chance to get lost. That's always my favorite way to explore a place. But I don't know, I was with Alex the day it opened. So I feel like a lot of our perspectives on this are very similar. Also, we've known each other for so long that to a certain point, a lot of our thoughts become the same. But yeah, it felt normal. It's been really convenient when I've been downtown for like a First Fridays or any kind of like concert or event or just going shopping, that I can just zip across wherever I need to go.
Amazing. As you then have examined the history of Portage and Main in turn, maybe Sabrina, I'll start with you on this. When it comes to your book, as you were doing the research for it, what were some of the things in its history that surprised you or made you look twice and go, really, that was a part of this intersection's history, this intersection that now, to borrow Alex's phrase, is so normal?
I mean, there's lots. I think one of the striking things is how frequently Winnipeg was struggling to figure out what to do with the space. It was always kind of in flux as the city changed. So, like, debates about should there be like streetlights, should there be sidewalks, should there be trees. At one point in the 1950s, they proposed a scramble crossing, a subway, and a monorail in the span of about 5 years.
All things that have come up like literally in the last few years, as well as people have proposed solutions, to call them that, for what to do with that intersection. As you look at that history, Alex, what do you think we can derive from the history of Portage and Main, and I guess by extension from your book, about the ways in which we think about infrastructure and living in the city of Winnipeg as a whole? A bit of a bigger question for you.
Yeah. I mean, there's this sort of, I don't know, unfortunate thing which has happened. We actually recorded an episode that'll come out on the day the book launches about sort of alternative futures for Portage and Main, things that we thought we might do that we never did, like the monorail or the subway. But there were a bunch of times when we thought we might do something with it, and we just never did. And I think that's a really unfortunate part of the history, that in the end, what made the decision for the reopening is just sort of crumbling infrastructure. And so, you know, in some ways, like, it's a blank slate. It's not like this is the end of the story. There are still things we can do with it. But I don't know what it says about Winnipeg that we were just sort of let it happen.
Based on all of this research then, Alex, we could talk then about maybe what that future holds. I mean, we learn so much from history to kind of help us forecast what comes next in any story, let alone the story of Portage and Main. Based on everything that you studied about the intersection, what do you think comes next? Not just maybe even for the intersection, but what does it mean for the downtown?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, Sabrina and I have talked about this a lot, that we often think that there's going to be like sort of one big thing and this will save downtown. And, you know, it's never going to be that, like, right? It's not going to be just Portage and Main. It's not going to be just the sort of pedestrian area on Graham or the new Portage Place, right? But all these things help. Of course, there are like social issues that need to be addressed, but there are also like smaller things that came up. You know, we talk about this design competition that happened in 2004 in the book. And one of the ideas was just to like plant more trees. And I think that would be really nice. Like, if you look at older pictures of Winnipeg, it's a much more sort of treed city. And so there are sort of smaller things that we can do that would make a difference and sort of soften it, make it a little friendlier.
Sabrina, what do you hope the book illustrates about how the city can continue to develop? Maybe again, I threw one big question at Alex, so I'm gonna throw it. I'll throw one at you now.
Sounds good. I don't know. I think what's interesting about the book is looking at all of the ways Winnipeg has tried to sort of identify itself in different ways as a big city in these different eras, and how they're using sort of urban planning in the landscape to illustrate these things that might not necessarily be true. We want to look big and metropolitan, but that's not really ever been the case since at least the 1910s. So I think maybe some acceptance of where Winnipeg sort of is, and not trying to build one big thing that can solve all of our problems, that we can do these little steps. We can make these small changes instead of planning big, having that plan fail or not work, and then waiting for the infrastructure to crumble to the point that we then have to take action again. I think there's a middle ground that we can probably find.
Which puts another big question then to my mind. What do you think Portage and Main says about the identity of Winnipeg? Or in other words, how does Winnipeg see itself in relation to the story, the ongoing debates, the what comes next for this iconic intersection?
Yeah, I mean, there's this really interesting sort of juxtaposition at Portage and Main where the buildings there have almost always been owned by Winnipeg's sort of wealthy elites. But at the street level, it's always been sort of a space for just regular people. And so like we see that really significantly during like the Winnipeg general strike, right? When there are clashes, right, at Portage and Main, but also more recently protests, right, draw us to Portage and Main. And so there is this sort of desire, I think, to be seen, to sort of make our voices heard. And Portage and Main is one of the places that we do that.
Part of the issue there, though, is that, like, this is something that we talked about in the book, too, is that Winnipeg hasn't had a true public square since 1919. So there's not, like, a space for people to gather, so we've kind of made Portage and Main this de facto meeting spot.
I have never thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense, and it's a real torque in my imagination about what this intersection is. So I'm going to put one final question to the two of you, and I'll ask Sabrina to answer this one first to give Alex the advantage, if you want to call it that, which is to say that the book is being launched and people are going to read it as they journey through Portage and Main after they read your book. What do you hope that your reader is thinking about?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like what I always like to think about with Winnipeg is how sort of new a lot of it is. Like, our history is not that old. There are little remnants of old Portage and Main scattered throughout the downtown area. So you can find the old Alloy and Champion Bank arch that was torn down when the intersection closed at the Forks. So to keep an eye out for those bits of history that are still scattered around and to, I don't know, be okay with it changing. It can't stay stagnant forever. Things come, things go.
Sure. What about for you, Alex? What do you hope your reader sees in Portage and Main after reading Portage and Main?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's, fun to envision, what it looked like in whatever the 1870s, to imagine this sort of big sort of expanse with just a few sort of permanent structures. And so I hope people envision that, but then I do also hope people envision the future of Portage and Main. And, what we might put there in the future.
And to be a little ambitious about it, maybe.
Yeah.
The fun with the design contest that we talk about in 2004, we didn't include all of the designs, but they're in the episode we'll be putting out on the 18th. There are some really bold ideas for what could be done there, including one that you put a little sun hat on the top of two of the buildings and then a wind blind draping down to try and protect you from the wind at the intersection. Which is never going to happen, but is a really fun idea.
We can only dream, and hopefully when you write the follow-up book in 20, 30 years, then that's exactly what will make up the final chapter. Portage and Main, How an Iconic Intersection Shaped Winnipeg's History, Politics, and Urban Life will be officially coming out on November the 18th. We'll have more information on how you can get it and the big launch event taking place as well at McNally Robinson Booksellers at our website, classic107.com. and the Classic 107 app. In the meantime, highly encourage you to check out the One Great History podcast for all things Winnipeg history. Sabrina Janke and Alex Judge, it's been such a joy talking to you about your book and about this Winnipeg landmark. Congratulations on the release of Portage and Main.
Thank you.
Thank you.